Simon Clarke.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an absolute pleasure to follow what I thought was a really excellent speech from the Honourable Gentleman. He absolutely sums up the ethical as well as the practical case for why we need continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent. And I think that it's been a really good debate. Indeed, I'd like to particularly praise my right honourable friend, the chairman of the Select Committee, who I thought also set out very crisply why we need to do this, why it is so much in our strategic interest to make sure that we have this level of protection. The honourable right honourable member for North Durham referred to The Silent Deep by Hennessy and Jinks, and that is a really excellent book setting out the debt we owe to the technological brilliance of scientists and engineers, the political resolve of successive governments and diplomats to make sure that we actually acquire the technology, and then, as my honourable friend from Berwick-upon-Tweed has pointed out, the personal courage, sacrifice and professionalism of thousands of submariners and their families down the decades. Even as we speak, our forces are keeping us safe. As we sleep tonight, they're keeping us safe. That is a debt that we can never really adequately repay, and the least we can do is spend time in this House today to put on record our gratitude and thanks for their service. Churchill referred to the Spitfire as a machine of colossal and shattering power, and of course these submarines are, in their own way, our modern answer to that. It's a power we all hope and pray will never have to be unleashed. But as the honourable member pointed out in his speech just now, the mere fact of its existence makes not just nuclear war, but all war less likely. If you think about the 1960s and 1970s and the superpower conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, it seems to me that almost inevitably at some point that would have flared into a conflict had it not been prevented by the fact the consequences of that conflict would have been unthinkable. The act of crossing into West Berlin would have come at too high a price to pay, and that remains still the fundamental basis for why we need the deterrent. In the world we live in today, Theodore Roosevelt's adage that you should walk softly and carry a big stick seems to me to have never been more apposite. There is the presence, we must acknowledge, of real evil in our world, intense and increasingly unpredictable. Whether it be Iran, North Korea or Russia, we all know that there are malign forces in this world who will not act by the rules that we would act by, who will not live by the values that we would live by, who set very little value by the sanctity or dignity of human life. And that is what we are up against. That is the choice which, as democratic politicians in one of the most powerful countries in the world, it behoves us to make. And I think we will be failing not just ourselves, but the rest of the world, were we to duck that responsibility. There was a window in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union where, of course, we heard much talk about the peace dividend, but I'm a great believer in what Vice President Cheney said when he said that the only dividend of peace is peace, and we shouldn't in any way attempt to do defence on the cheap or without the resources and the tools to make sure that we can keep ourselves safe. And that's why it's so welcome, of course, that the decision to launch the Successor Class programme has been made. And indeed, as the Chairman of the Defence Committee pointed out, as my honourable friend for Raylene Wickford pointed out, it's crucial that we get regular updates and focus on continuing that programme at pace, because we cannot afford further slippage. We are already, frankly, right at the limit of what we can expect the Vanguard class to continue to deliver. It's also why it's so important that we have brave Labour MPs on the other side making the case for why we need the strategic nuclear deterrent, because as we do know, this is not a debate for partisanship. Yes, I will.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. I don't regard it as an act of outstanding courage to be up speaking in support of long-standing and current Labour Party policy.
I am absolutely delighted that he regards this as an item of faith that it will indeed be pursued. But we know that we have a leader of the opposition, a shadow chancellor, a shadow home secretary, indeed a shadow defence secretary who voted against the motion of the 18th of July 2016 in which this House pledged to renew the deterrent. So I think there is question over this, and anyone who's seen, certainly in my own part of the world, the actions of Labour activists, the noises they make, don't suggest to me that this is in any way a question settled beyond doubt. And so I think it is important. I pay tribute to him for making that case. It should come from both traditions.
Well, I know it's become policy in the Tory party to be pick and mix on which policy you actually support, but there's one thing I would say about the leader of the opposition that he's made very clear, being a leader, is that he sees the primacy of the Labour Party conference and its policy.
On that note of great unity, let us resolve the matter there. I very much hope that the right honourable gentleman is listening to this debate, and that he does indeed heed the wise words of the honourable gentleman. Quite simply, there is no value to being morally pure if you're dead, and that is something which I think we need to underscore time and again in this debate. Our way of life in the West, compassionate, sometimes chaotic, but above all free, is underpinned only by the security of our defences. That is the ultimate litmus test of our ability to continue to live our lives free in the way that we want to. And I do think that the debt that we owe those people who, unheralded, frankly, and very often forgotten about, including, frankly, by me, I can't be alone in taking it totally for granted that we have that deterrent ability. And when you actually think about what it requires of families, of the sailors involved, to live that life day in, day out for years, it does bring it home how much they've contributed. And the fact that we haven't had another nuclear weapon deployed since 1945 is not an accident. It is precisely because of the principle of deterrence. And I think that principle will endure, because I can see no way in which these weapons can be uninvented, and therefore I can see no realistic situation in which we will ever be able to totally disarm. Obviously, the United Kingdom, to answer the Scottish nationalist point, the United Kingdom does maintain the minimal possible deterrent consistent with actually being able to deploy it as required. We are not in any way reckless about it. I absolutely pray that we never have to use it. But the point stands that we must make the message very clear to the rest of the world. We would use it if this country or our allies were attacked in such a barbarous fashion. And that applies not only to direct nuclear attack, but to biological chemical weapons as well, because those are things which do need to be understood to be abhorrent weapons, and we must have the ability to counteract if required. I will, of course,
very briefly, I'm afraid to say he's wrong when he says that the government isn't reckless. It hasn't decommissioned a nuclear submarine since 1980. The National Audit Office itself said last week it's at the risk of becoming an irresponsible nuclear power. So he's just wrong when he says that.
No, this debate is about the principle of deterrence. I mean, look, on the decommissioning of the boats, on the decommissioning of the boats, the MOD will make provision to make sure they're put away. But the point about this debate is that is underway. But the point is, look, the question that's got from a sedentary position. I'm getting heckled, so I can't hardly. Well, by all means.
Just to say, he should speak to his colleague. Perhaps you can educate him.
The principle of this debate is about whether we should be having the nuclear deterrent. The Scottish nationalists, for a mixture of bizarre sort of loathing, self-loathing of this country, and political opportunism. No. I'm proud to come from a country which will defend ourselves and our allies. And if that's good enough for the United Kingdom, it's certainly good enough for Scotland. And actually, the mere fact that this debate has been characterised, the only negative tone in this entire debate has been injected by common accord by the SNP. They're the only ones who want to divide the House, and I will not give way. I've had enough negative carping for a bunch of people who, frankly, bring great discredit upon their own country by their constant negativity and the way in which they are the sole dissenting voice in a country which otherwise widely recognises our responsibilities to ourselves and others to stand up for what we believe in. If you won't do it, I certainly will. In this resolve, we must never falter, because in the end there are those relying on us not to falter in that duty. And we mustn't falter in our duty of gratitude, respect and upholding a military covenant to those who discharge this duty on our behalf. We're very fortunate to have them. We're very fortunate to have the deterrent. Long may it continue.